if you really think about it. Guys like you are going, climate change exists. Here's the best way to approach it. And they're saying, we're not going to listen to you because you're a denier.
Yeah, there's certainly a bit of that. And, Newsom clearly says, there are lots of fire in California, which is absolutely true. So let's, all go to electric cars, which even if his theory was right, is just simply going to have zero impact even in 80 years from now. And you got to ask yourself, is this just about us feeling good? Is this just about virtue signaling? Or do we actually want to do something that's both actually functional, that'll actually have an impact on climate, and also, of course, politically possible to imagine? Because a lot of these promises that are now being given are essentially promises that politicians themselves know they cannot get through. Once they have to tell their populations how much this is going to cost, the populations are just simply going to say, no, we don't want to pay that. Take one good example. A new Nature study shows that almost getting to Biden's net zero policy in 2050 in the smartest possible way will cost 11.9% of US GDP by 2050. And every year that means each American will have to hand over more than $11,000 every year to fix this climate problem. Clearly, that's not going to happen. Remember, there's a majority in the US against giving $24. Proposing something that's hundreds of times more costly is just simply not going to cut it. And that's why this is not a question, is there a problem? But it's a question of saying your solution is either just virtue signaling, like let's all switch to electric cars right away, or it's so phenomenally expensive it won't happen.
Do you see, to me, I always think of nuclear power and many subjects that are discussed politically all kind of boil down to that, not specifically, but sort of metaphorically, which is there is this thing that exists. It would help this problem. Those who claim to be concerned with the problem the most are the voices that are loudest against the thing that would be most helpful for the problem that they never stop talking about, which then makes me curious. Do they really believe this problem, or is everything just sort of politicized? And, it was funny. I was watching Bill Maher the other night, and he said, silence is violence. And then he paused. He said, just because it rhymes doesn't make it true. And just because you put no in front of nukes doesn't mean it's true. It just means it starts with the same letter. So is it a situation where politicians, going back to Gavin Newsom, are understand what's going on and are trying to win votes and the populace is misinformed? Or do they really believe what's going on? And then also, every 8 years, somebody tells us you have 8 years to live, and it never comes around, but it doesn't seem to faze them. I asked 9 questions there, but
you did.
Go to the nuke
You're
part.
absolutely right. I mean, look, the first UN-sponsored environment conference back in 1972, actually in Stockholm, the organizer, who later went on to be the first UN environment director, said, we have 10 years to avoid the catastrophe. So we've been hearing this for 50 years, and it still hasn't happened. I think there is something, exactly to your point, that if you're really worried about climate change, surely you would embrace the only technology we have right now that could actually mitigate this really quickly, which is nuclear. I think it's important to distinguish between 2 different kinds of nuclear. One is the nuclear we've already built. So remember, we built it. We've already plowed in billions of dollars to build it. We've already committed to decommissioning it eventually. Those are the 2 large costs of a nuclear power plant. So fundamentally, while it's running, it's almost free. So what these guys are essentially saying when they're closing down existing power plants is, we have this almost free, CO2-free energy source, but we don't want it. That just does not make any sense whatsoever. It's essentially a promise to say we want higher energy costs, but with more CO2. That's exactly the opposite of what they want. So closing down existing power plants is just stupid. This is what they do in Germany. This is what you're doing in Diablo Canyon in California and many other places, right?
Yes. Well,
wrong idea. Then there's the other one.
I want to talk. I just want to plant this in your head. I do want to talk about how Germany approached this and what happened, and I'll circle back to California. But keep going, Bjorn.
Yeah. All right. The other thing is, should we build more nuclear power plants? And unfortunately, there it seems like that's actually a very costly proposition right now. So the power plants that you're trying to build in Finland and in the UK and many other places turn out to be phenomenally expensive. And so right now, new nuclear is probably not the solution, just simply because it's more expensive than pretty much anything else you can come up with. And that's why we need to investigate how we make fourth generation nuclear much cheaper. But the existing power plants, don't shut them down. If you're shutting them down, it shows you just don't care either about climate nor about the consumers who actually have to pay higher prices for more pollution.
Well, you can tell me, yes, I live in California. What we do is we go, that's a nuclear power plant. We're going to have it shut down by 2021. And then the summer hits and the power grid crashes and we don't have electricity. And then the governor says, well, keep it open for a little while longer. I know Germany said we're going to get rid of all our stuff and we're going to switch over to wind and solar. And they ran into a lot of trouble as well. And we'll talk about that. But it kind of reminds me, it's kind of like the current situation. So I'm in California. Gas here is knocking on the door of $6 a gallon. So this, to me, which may feel cheap to you in Sweden, I don't know. But for us, it's expensive. And it has gone up. I mean, it has essentially doubled in the last 10 months. And so to paint the picture, and it kind of strikes me, it's sort of the same with a lot of the climate change people we're talking about. Biden comes in and he goes, so we are for the first time independent power-wise from a fossil fuel standpoint now. So America is for the first time in ever, maybe 70 years, but ostensibly the first time ever, we're exporting power, fracking, natural gas, boom, we're putting it out. Then Biden comes in and he goes, no more of this. We're shutting down those pipelines, shutting down the drilling on federal lands and blah, blah, blah. And everyone goes, okay, what's the plan? And he says, no, we're just shutting it down. And so they shut it down and then gas doubles. And now we're worried about having enough fuel. And then we're exporting it from the Saudis or the OPEC nations or whomever. And that's like, well, that's not a plan. The plan can't be just shut down the nuclear power plant. The plan has to be shut down the nuclear power plant and then flip the on switch on the solar farm that's working magnificently. It can't just be, I'm against stuff. And I feel like that's the problem in general with the climate change people. Like, shut down the pipeline, shut down the fracking, shut down the nuclear power plant. Okay, now what? Oh, then we're going to import oil from the Russians. But that doesn't seem like a good plan.
And you get this, this almost bizarre situation that you have Biden calling the OPEC, essentially from the plane going to the climate summit and asking them, please produce more oil. And what that shows you is whenever the cost really start hitting consumers, most politicians back out of most of their expensive climate promises. It is not a good plan to simply say, I really care about the climate. I want to go all new. I want to go all renewable, unless it's actually costly, in which case I'm just going to renege on the whole thing. No, you have to find a plan that can survive a lot of Congresses and survive a lot of presidents and actually be stable towards a place where we'll emit a lot less carbon and be better off at the same time. This is not the plan that we're seeing right now.
What happened in Germany?
So Germany got very excited about the idea of they could lead the world on renewables, essentially. So they both wanted to get rid of nuclear. It only happened after Fukushima, if you remember the big tsunami that hit. And of course, that was a terrible tragedy. And in that context, Fukushima was a very small parenthesis for Japan, but it looked really scary. And so the chancellor in Germany said, let's also close all the nuclear power plants, which makes no sense because it's not like Germany is in any danger of a tsunami. But
right.
Anyway, so you have this situation that they want to go renewable. They have spent an enormous amount of money, so certainly above $500 billion in direct support in US dollars over the last 25 years. They have some of the highest energy costs in the world. And they have almost not cut their carbon emissions. Why? Because they also shut down their nuclear power plants. And of course, when you shut down that, most of it will be filled up with fossil fuels. So you have this absurd situation that the Germans have spent an enormous amount of money. They're incredibly proud of what they have achieved. They have cut a little bit of CO2, but not very much, at enormous cost. That is not a way to showcase to the world, here's how to do it. If anything, it shows most people how not to do it.
And didn't they have to cut the deal with Russia to do the pipeline?
Yes, of course. We're also now actually hugely dependent on Russia for gas because you can't run solar and wind right now without having backup. Remember, what are you going to do when there's no wind or there's no sun? A lot of people sort of casually suggest, batteries. But right now, the whole world has less batteries, and remember, most of these are actually now electric cars, less batteries than to store 1 minute of our electricity consumption. You just can't make this up. We cannot, in any realistic time frame, imagine that we would be able to sort of store for weeks or even months the necessary power, and that's why you need gas as an intermediate fuel, and that's of course why you need Russia, because Biden is not producing enough, and because Europe essentially said, we don't want to frack.
Is this a fair statement to just sort of look at the whole thing kind of philosophically, which is we have a technology that runs our modern society that's, 100 plus years old, oil fuel essentially. And we haven't liked that notion for a long time because it feels old and it feels dirty. So we have said we're going to push toward the future with solar and wind and hydrothermal or whatever we're proposing. And voices like you have said, well, good for you, but we're not there yet. So we can't just push there. We're not there yet. And I think the voices who champion it are sort of going, well, we're not there yet, but the only way we're going to get there is to make gas $10 a gallon and really make things hard on people who choose to drive a car with an internal combustion engine in it or run a power plant off of coal or whatever it is. Once we squeeze that hard enough, that'll get us there more quickly. But like as we've seen in Germany, it doesn't seem to get us there. They get rid of one thing, the future doesn't work, and next thing you know, there's a pipeline going to Russia.
Yep. And a lot of coal being burned in Germany again. So you're absolutely right. Look, you can't just do wishful statements and hope somehow you'll arrive there. And I think that's to a very large extent what's happened. You've said, we really, really, really want to get there. So, let's just rush there. No, that's not a plan, just like you pointed out before. I think the second part is that in some way we better just try to rush as fast ahead as we can until somebody like Trump comes and disrupts the whole thing. And I guess that politically makes a slight bit of sense. But the reality again here is if you want to do something for 2050, you can't make policies that'll drive gasoline up so high that people are just going to vote against it. They're just going to elect Bolsonaros all around instead and just protest against this kind of thing. And then you'll be back to square one or almost back to square one. You have to find a way that's both cheap enough that most people will accept it, and that's smart enough that this will actually succeed. And unfortunately, that means you can't do this tomorrow.
What is in the future? What do you know? So a couple things. I don't hold a lot of faith out for, government and politicians, but there are entrepreneur scientists like Elon Musk. I mean, he's not a scientist, but possibly he is. I don't know how to define him, but the point is I feel like guys like that are going to solve this problem for us with technology. And I've talked before about people